Hey, it's Ashley. Tonight's story begins like a case file. A missing woman, a worried husband, a private investigator with just enough instinct to know something is wrong. But this one doesn't stay simple for very long. Because some monsters don't leave bodies behind, they leave absences, gaps in memory, holes in history, lives erased so completely it's like they were never here at all. This is the monster within. The memory hit me like a physical blow, a wave of phantom heat and coppery scent that knocked me back against the cracked leather of my chair. Not mine, never mine. They came from others, like secondhand smoke. This one was a doozy. A woman's perspective, the scratch of cheap wool against her cheek, the cold bite of a kitchen linoleum floor, and a face swimming in her vision, a man's face, twisted with effort. A kitchen towel wrapped tight around her throat. The pressure built, an impossible vise closing in. Stars burst behind her eyes. My own lungs burned in sympathetic protest. Then, nothing. I came gasping back to my own reality, the murky light of my office, the scent of stale coffee and rain. I rubbed my throat, the ghost of that constriction still tight beneath my skin. Another ghost, just like the others that haunted my waking hours. I shut them out most of the time, built walls in my mind like a mental fortress. But this one had felt different. Louder, more real. My phone buzzed on the cluttered desk, vibrating against a stack of unpaid invoices. I glanced at the screen. Cameron Clarke, my only client in months. A worried husband, willing to pay my exorbitant rates to find out if his wife was cheating. Simple. Miserable. Exactly the kind of job that kept the lights on and the memories at bay. I hit accept. Cameron, Madison? Any luck? His voice was a thin, reedy thing, perpetually hopeful and perpetually let down. I'm working on it, I lied, the taste of it bitter on my tongue. I hadn't even started looking for Mrs. Clarke yet. My last extraction had been messy, leaving a psychic splatter on my mental walls I was still scrubbing clean. Maybe tomorrow's no good, he said, a new urgency creeping in. There's something else. Can you come to the house now? The request was unusual. I always worked from my office. Safer that way, for both of us. Less chance of me accidentally brushing against a stranger's life story in a crowded room. Why not here? It's my wife, Brooke. She's missing. The coppery scent from the memory surged again, sharp and insistent. A knot of dread, cold and heavy, settled in my gut. Since when? I don't know. She wasn't here when I got home from work. Her car's gone, but her purse is still on the counter. Her phone, too. He paused, and I could hear the ragged edge of his breath. Please, Madison. Just come. I looked around my office, at the peeling paint and the water-stained ceiling. The fortress was crumbling anyway. Maybe one more breach wouldn't matter. Text me the address. I hung up before he could respond, grabbing my coat from the hook. As my fingers brushed the worn fabric, a jolt ran through me. An echo, not a memory, but a premonition, a shimmer of wrongness that clung to the air. Something was waiting for me out there. Something beyond a simple missing person case. Something that smelled of kitchen towels and impending doom. Cameron Clarke's house was one of those sterile, beige monstrosities in a suburb that prided itself on sameness. Perfect lawn, perfect hedges, perfect little welcome mat that said live, laugh, love. The air, however, was anything but perfect. It hummed with a discordant energy, a frantic psychic static that set my teeth on edge. I could feel it even before I stepped through the front door. A house in distress. Cameron was pacing in the entryway, a shorter man with a comb-over and eyes that were too wide for his face. You're here, he said, relief warring with the panic etched around his mouth. Thank God. I'm here, I confirmed, shrugging off my coat. I didn't offer false comfort. It wasn't my style. Tell me what happened exactly. He wrung his hands. I told you on the phone. I came home. She was gone. No note. No call. Any fights recently? We don't fight. he said a little too quickly. We have disagreements. Right. My gaze swept the room. Everything was meticulous, not a throw pillow out of place. It felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit titled The Perfect Marriage. The only thing out of place was the faint, lingering scent of the memory I'd touched earlier. Wool, linoleum, the metallic tang of blood. My eyes landed on the kitchen door, slightly ajar. I need to see the kitchen. He led me inside. More beige, more sterile perfection, granite countertops, a pot of basil on the windowsill. And then I saw it. Faint, almost invisible, a smudge on the otherwise pristine linoleum floor near the sink. A dark, reddish-brown smear. Did she cook last night? I asked, my voice tight. Pasta, Cameron said, staring at the spot as if seeing it for the first time. With marinara sauce. That's what he'd tell himself. That's what anyone would see. But I didn't just see. I felt. The memory I'd experienced wasn't just some random vision plucked from the ether. It was an echo, a residue left behind by a violent act, right here in this perfect beige kitchen. I knelt down, my fingers hovering just above the stain, not touching, but close enough to feel the psychic charge. Cold. Desperate. A struggle. Brooke's purse and phone, I said, standing up slowly. Where are they? He pointed to the kitchen island. A tan leather purse sat on the counter, its flap open. Next to it, a sleek, black smartphone, screen dark. Anything missing from her purse? I asked, my mind racing. A woman leaves in a hurry. She takes her phone, her keys, her wallet. She doesn't leave them all behind. He shrugged helplessly. I don't know. I didn't want to touch her things. I pulled a pen from my jacket pocket, using the tip to nudge the contents of her purse aside. Lipstick, a compact, a half-eaten pack of gum, a wallet stuffed with credit cards and cash. Everything seemed to be there. I turned my attention to the island's surface. It was clean, wiped down. Too clean. Except for one place. A small, nearly invisible crescent-shaped scratch near the phone. I crouched, the light from the overhead fixture catching it just right. It was fresh. I could feel the anger and frustration that had put it there. Not Brooke's. The energy was male, sharp and possessive. Cameron's? Maybe. I stood up and faced him. He was watching me, a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. Have you called the police? And say what? He shot back. That my wife is gone for a few hours. They'll tell me to wait. They always do. He took a shuddering breath. That's why I called you. You find things. The police, they just fill out paperwork. He wasn't wrong. I'm going to need something of hers. Something personal. He looked blank. Like what? A hairbrush. A piece of jewelry she wore often. Something with a strong psychic connection. The rules of engagement were clear. The stronger the connection, the clearer the memory. And right now, I needed clarity. Upstairs, in our bedroom, her closet. She has a jewelry box. I nodded and headed for the stairs, leaving him to fret in the kitchen. The second floor was just as beige, just as suffocating. In the master bedroom, a king-size bed was made with military precision. Her closet was open. Rows of blouses, dresses, and slacks, all color-coordinated. It was like walking into a mausoleum for a life that had never truly been lived. On the top shelf, I found a rosewood jewelry box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a silver locket. It was cool to the touch, but the second my fingers closed around it, the world tilted. A flash of a different memory, softer. A picnic blanket spread out under a sprawling oak tree. Cameron, younger with a full head of hair, laughing. Brooke, her face flushed with happiness, clicking the locket shut around her neck. I'll never take it off, she thought, her internal voice a warm, melodic hum. A promise. But underneath the warmth, a flicker of something else. A shadow. A man watching from a distance, just at the edge of the tree line. His features were indistinct, but his intent was a sour, acidic taste in the back of my throat. Possession. Obsession. I pulled back, my own breathing ragged. The locket felt hot in my hand, like a tiny branding iron. The promise was real. The happiness was real. But so was the shadow. I pocketed the locket and headed back downstairs, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting images. The happy wife, the suffocating house, the violent end on the kitchen floor, the lurking stranger. Cameron was right where I'd left him. "Find anything?" he asked, his eyes pleading. "I need to make a call," I said, my voice flat, betraying nothing of the storm raging inside me. I walked out the front door, onto the pristine concrete of the driveway, and pulled out my phone. I didn't dial the police. I dialed a number I knew by heart, one that hadn't been used in years. He answered on the second ring. Maddie. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, familiar and unwelcome all at once. "It's been a while. I need information, Jordan." A dry chuckle on the other end. "Of course you do. What's the going rate these days?" "This one's different," I said, glancing back at the house. The discordant energy was getting stronger, as if the house itself was screaming. "A woman named Brooke Clarke is missing. Her husband thinks she ran off. I think she's dead. Missing persons are police business. Not when the murder happened 2 days ago and it's already been wiped clean from every record it might have touched." Silas went quiet on the other end. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. "Wiped how?" Psychically, I said the word, feeling foreign and dangerous on my tongue. "There's a residue here, a powerful one. And something else. A shadow. Someone was watching her. Someone. Not like us." A heavy sigh. "Where are you?" I gave him the address. "Don't come here," I added quickly. "Not yet. Just see if you can find anything. A whisper, a rumor. Anything at all about a woman named Brooke Clarke who doesn't exist anymore." "I'll see what I can find," he said. And then the line went dead. I walked back inside, the locket a heavy weight in my pocket. Cameron looked up, his face a mask of desperation. Did you find something?" I looked at him, really looked at him. He seemed small, broken. He seemed small, broken. He could be a grieving husband or a brilliant actor playing the part. He could be the man from the picnic, grown older and more possessive. Or he could be just another pawn in a game I didn't yet understand. "We need to go to the police," I said, my decision made. This was too big to handle alone, too dangerous. "No," he shouted, the sound echoing in the cavernous beige room. "I told you they won't help. They'll just think I'm crazy." "They might," I conceded, taking a step closer. "Or they might have a record of a woman named Brooke Clarke. They might have a file, a report, something. And if they don't," I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in, "then we know we're dealing with something far worse than a cheating wife and a simple disappearance." He stared at me, his mind clearly racing. He was trapped between the familiar world of police reports and missing persons cases, and the terrifying, unknown world I was offering him. He finally gave a jerky nod. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay, we'll go." The precinct was a symphony of chaos, a cacophony of ringing phones, shouting officers, and the constant underlying hum of anxiety that came with the job. I'd been here before, on the other side of the desk, a different woman in a different life. The memories were like phantom limbs, aching with a pain I couldn't quite place. A harried-looking officer with a coffee-stained shirt and a perpetually bored expression directed us to a small, windowless room. "Wait here," he grunted, shutting the door behind him. Cameron was practically vibrating with nervous energy, pacing the cramped space like a caged animal. "What do we say? What if they don't believe us?" "We stick to the truth," I said, my own unease a cold knot in my stomach. "Most of it anyway." The door opened and a woman walked in. She was tall, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense air about her. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her gray suit was immaculate. "Detective Inspector Natalie Morgan," she said, her accent crisp and Eastern European. "You wanted to report a missing person?" "Yes," I said, rising from my chair, My client, Cameron Clarke, is concerned about his wife, Brooke. Morgan's gaze swept over me, then settled on Cameron. Mr. Clarke, when did you last see your wife? Yesterday morning, he stammered. Before I left for work. And you've tried calling her? She left her phone at home, he said, wringing his hands. Her wallet, her car keys, everything's gone, but her phone and her purse are still at the house. Morgan nodded, her expression unreadable. She was listening, but her eyes were scanning, her mind processing. I could feel the faint tickle of her own thoughts, a chaotic mix of case files, deadlines, and a vague annoyance at being pulled away from her current workload. She was good. Her mental walls were solid. And you are? She asked, turning her attention to me. Madison Croft, I said. A private investigator. Morgan's eyebrow arched slightly. A pie? And why have you hired a pie, Mr. Clarke, if you're not even sure your wife is missing? Cameron looked at me, panic in his eyes. I stepped in. He was concerned. Mrs. Clarke had been distant lately. He wanted to be sure. Distant and how? That's not relevant, I said, trying to steer the conversation. The important thing is, she's gone. Morgan's gaze sharpened. It's very relevant, Miss Croft. People who are distant often have reasons for being so, reasons that might explain their absence. I could feel the conversation slipping away from me. She was already building a narrative in her head, one that involved a bored housewife and a midlife crisis. I needed to shake things up. Detective, I said, leaning forward, I think there's more to this. I think Brooke Clarke might be in danger. Based on what? Morgan asked, her tone turning skeptical. A feeling, I said, knowing how it sounded. A professional intuition. She let out a short, humorless laugh. A feeling. Right. Look, Miss Croft, I appreciate you trying to help your client, but we deal in facts here. And the facts are, a grown woman has been gone for less than 24 hours. She left her phone and her purse. It's too early to call it a disappearance, and it's certainly too early to call it foul play. She's not in the system, is she? I asked, the question hanging in the air between us. Morgan's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of surprise in her eyes. I'm sorry, Brooke Clarke, I repeated, my voice low and steady. Run her name, social security number, driver's license, anything you can find. I'll wait. Morgan stared at me, her expression a mixture of annoyance and intrigue. She was a good cop, and a good cop doesn't ignore a challenge like that. She stood up and walked to the door, pausing for a moment. Don't move, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The door clicked shut, leaving me and Cameron in the oppressive silence of the interrogation room. What are you doing? He whispered, his face pale. Testing a theory, I said, my mind racing. The minutes stretched into an eternity. I could feel Morgan's presence on the other side of the door, her concentration focused, her mind reaching out into the digital ether. I could feel the flicker of confusion, then frustration, then a dawning sense of disbelief. The door opened again and Morgan walked back in, her face a mask of controlled fury. There's nothing, she said, her voice tight. No Brooke Clarke. No driver's license, no social security number, no tax records. It's like she doesn't exist. The words hung in the air, a confirmation of my deepest fears. The web of lies was bigger than I'd imagined. That's impossible, Cameron sputtered, his eyes wide with shock. She's my wife. We have a mortgage, a joint bank account. We checked, Morgan said, cutting him off. There's a Cameron Clarke. He's listed as sole owner of the house. There's a joint bank account, but the only other name on it is B. Clarke. No maiden name, no date of birth, no other identifier. It's like she's a ghost. A ghost. The word sent a shiver down my spine. I knew about ghosts. I'd been talking to them my whole life. But this was different. This was a woman who had been systematically erased from the world of the living. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver locket. This was hers. Morgan took it, her gloved fingers handling it with a delicate touch. She opened it. Inside were two tiny, faded photos, one of Cameron, younger and smiling, The other of a woman, her face radiant with happiness. Brooke, Cameron breathed, a tear tracing a path down his cheek. I need to see the photo, I said, holding out my hand. Morgan passed it to me. I held it in my palm, the cool metal a stark contrast to the heat that was building in my mind. I focused on the woman's face, on the memory of the picnic, on the promise she'd made. The world around me faded, and I was back under the oak tree, the sun warm on my skin. He'll be so surprised, Brooke thought, her internal voice a melody of pure joy. He thinks I forgot, but I never forget. She clicked the locket shut, the sound a tiny definitive click in the quiet of the afternoon. Then, a shift in the air, the shadow. The man at the edge of the tree line was closer now. His features were still a blur, but I could feel the intensity of his gaze, the obsessive pull of his energy. He's watching me again, she thought, a flicker of fear cutting through her happiness. I need to tell Cameron. I need to make him understand. I pulled back, my own heart pounding in my chest. She was afraid, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Of someone, a man. He'd been watching her. Morgan stared at me, her skepticism warring with a burgeoning curiosity. Watching her how? I don't know, I admitted. But it wasn't a random stalker. It was something else. Something connected. To what? To her, I said, my mind racing. To her very existence. I looked at Cameron, who was staring at me with a mixture of awe and terror. Did she ever mention anyone? Anyone who made her uncomfortable? He shook his head, a dazed look in his eyes. No, she would have told me. Would she? I asked. The question a gentle prod. He flinched, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. We weren't as close as we used to be. With work and the house, I guess I didn't notice. The admission hung in the air, a small but significant crack in the facade of their perfect marriage. But there was no time for recriminations. There was only the mystery of a woman who had been erased from the world and the chilling memory of her murder, a murder that had never officially happened. Morgan was watching me, her mind working overtime. She was a cop. She needed evidence, not just feelings and fragmented memories. But she was also a pragmatist, and she knew that sometimes the most baffling cases required a different kind of thinking. All right, she said, her voice crisp and decisive. Let's say I believe you. Let's say a woman named Brooke Clarke existed, and now she's gone. And someone or something has gone to great lengths to erase her. Where do we start looking? We start with the house, I said, my gaze meeting hers. The energy there is strongest. The murder happened there. The erasure happened there. The erasure happened there. It's the epicenter. Morgan nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. Then we go back to the house, and this time we look for things that aren't there. The second visit to the Clarke house was different. The air was thicker, the silence heavier. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next act in the unfolding drama. Morgan was a commanding presence, her sharp gaze missing nothing. She had 2 uniformed officers with her, their faces grim and determined. I want a forensic team here, she said, her voice clipped and professional. Tear this place apart. Look for anything. A hair, a fiber, a drop of blood. Anything that doesn't belong. The officers nodded and got to work. Morgan turned to me. And what about you? What do you see? I closed my eyes, letting the psychic energy of the house wash over me. It was a maelstrom of emotions. Love, happiness, fear, desperation, and a cold, calculated malice that was so powerful, it felt like a physical presence. I followed the trail of malice, leading me from the kitchen, up the stairs, and into the master bedroom. The room was just as sterile as before, but now I could see it for what it was. A prison. The perfectly made bed was not a sign of order, but of control. The color-coordinated clothes were not a sign of organization, but as a life that had been meticulously curated, right down to the last detail. I walked over to the closet, my fingers trailing over the rows of blouses and dresses. Then I saw it. a small, almost invisible seam on the back wall of the closet. I pressed on it, and a panel slid open, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside was a single, leather-bound journal. Morgan was at my side in an instant. "What is it?" "A diary," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I opened it. The pages filled with a neat, flowing script. Brooke's script. I started to read, my eyes scanning the pages. June 14th. Cameron doesn't understand. He thinks I'm being silly. He says I'm just tired. But I know what I saw. A man. Standing across the street, just watching. He was there again today. July 3rd. He's getting closer. I see him everywhere. At the grocery store, at the park. I told Cameron, but he just laughs it off. He says I'm being dramatic. I'm not. I'm scared. August 22nd. I went to the police today. They didn't believe me. They said there was no record of the man I described. They asked me if I was taking any medication. I felt like a fool. September 5th. He was in the house today. I don't know how he got in, but when I came home from the store, the back door was unlocked. I could feel him. His presence was everywhere. I called Cameron, but he was in a meeting. I was all alone. The entries continued, a chronicle of a woman's descent into terror. I could feel her fear, her desperation, her growing sense of isolation. She was trapped, not just by her stalker, but by the disbelief of everyone around her, even her own husband. I looked at Cameron, who was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of horror. "Did you know about this?" I asked, my voice cold. He shook his head, his eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and denial. "No, I swear." She never said anything. I held up the journal. "She said everything, Cameron. You just weren't listening." He flinched, the words hitting him like a physical blow. I didn't know. I was busy. "I was busy being a ghost in your own wife's life." I finished for him, my own anger rising. "She was terrified, and you were too wrapped up in your own little world to even notice." Morgan put a calming hand on my arm. "Easy, Madison. We'll get to the bottom of this." She turned to one of the officers. "Bag that, and get me a warrant for Mr. Clarke's phone and computer records." The officer nodded and took the journal, placing it in an evidence bag. I could feel the lingering energy of Brooke's fear clinging to the pages, a final, desperate cry for help that had gone unanswered. I walked out of the room, the journal's revelations echoing in my mind. The man from the diary, the shadow from the memory, was real, and he was powerful. Powerful enough to erase a woman from existence, powerful enough to manipulate the memories of those around him. He was a ghost in the system, a phantom in the machine, and I was the only one who could see him. I pulled out my phone and dialed Jordan's number again. He answered on the first ring. "You were right," I said, my voice tight. "There's something very wrong here." "Tell me something I don't know," he said, his voice a low grumble. "She kept a diary," I said. "She was being stalked for months. The police wouldn't help. Her husband wouldn't listen. She was all alone." "Stalked by whom?" Jordan asked, his tone suddenly serious. "I don't know," I admitted. "But he's not human. Not entirely. He's a psychic parasite. He feeds on fear, on memories. He's the one who erased her. And he's still out there." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could feel Jordan's mind working, accessing a network of information that existed in the shadows, a world of whispers and rumors that most people never knew existed. "I've heard of them," he said, his voice grim. "Memory eaters. They're rare. And they're dangerous. They don't just take memories. They take the person who held them. They erase them from the world, leaving behind a hollow shell of a life that never was." The name sent a chill down my spine. Memory eater. It fit. It fit perfectly. "They're drawn to strong emotions," Jordan continued. "Love, hate, fear. They're psychic vultures, circling their prey until they're weak enough to strike." "So how do we stop him?" I asked, my mind racing. You don't, Jordan said, his voice flat. You run, you hide. You hope you're not the next one on the menu. I'm not running, I said, my voice firm. Not this time, another silence. Then you're a fool, Maddie, he said. But you're a stubborn fool. I'll see what else I can find. But be careful. This thing you're hunting, it's not like the others. It's a different kind of ghost. He hung up, leaving me with a chilling sense of dread. A different kind of ghost. I knew what he meant. The ghosts I dealt with were echoes, remnants of lives once lived. This thing was something else entirely. It was a predator, a hunter, and I was starting to feel like its prey. I walked back into the bedroom. Morgan was talking to one of the officers, her face a mask of concentration. Cameron was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He looked broken, a man whose perfect world had just been shattered by the ugly truth. I walked over to him, my own anger replaced by a wave of pity. She loved you, I said, my voice soft. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I know, he choked out. I know. And I let her down. You can still make it right, I said. Help us find him. Help us get justice for Brooke. He nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes. I'll do whatever it takes. Morgan walked over, her expression grim. We have a problem, she said, holding up a tablet. The journal's gone. What? I asked, my heart sinking. How? It just vanished, she said, her voice tight with frustration. 1 minute it was in the evidence bag, the next minute it was gone. The officer who bagged it swears he didn't take his eyes off it. I felt a cold dread wash over me. The memory eater. He was here. Or at least his influence was. He was already cleaning up his messes, erasing the evidence, tightening the web of lies. He's getting rid of the trail, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Morgan stared at me, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. Who is? The man from the diary, I said, my gaze meeting hers. The memory eater. Morgan's face hardened. That's enough, Miss Croft. I'm willing to entertain the possibility of a sophisticated conspiracy, but I'm not going to start chasing after phantoms. He's not a phantom, I said, my voice rising with frustration. He's real, and he's playing with us. He's toying with us. He's showing us how powerful he is. And how exactly is he doing that? Morgan asked, her tone skeptical. By erasing things, I shot back. The journal, Brooke's records, her very existence. He's a psychic parasite, and he's feeding on our fear, our disbelief. Morgan shook her head, a look of pity in her eyes. I think you've been working too hard, Miss Croft. This case is clearly taking its toll. I could feel her shutting me out, her mind a fortress of logic and reason. I was losing her. I was losing the only ally I had in the world of the living. I had to do something. I had to show her. I took a deep breath, centering myself, and reached out with my mind. Past the walls of her skepticism, past the layers of her training and experience, and touched the core of her being. I showed her the memory of Brooke's murder, the scratch of the wool, the coal of linoleum, the face of the man, the pressure of the towel, the stars bursting behind her eyes. I showed her the terror, the desperation, the final gasping breath of a life being extinguished. Morgan staggered back, her hand flying to her throat. Her eyes were wide, with a mixture of horror and disbelief. What did you do? She gasped. I showed you the truth, I said, my own breathing ragged from the effort. It had taken more out of me than I'd expected, the psychic residue of the memory eater, a corrosive acid against my mind. That's impossible, she stammered, her face pale. That's not real. It's as real as the air you're breathing, I said, my voice firm. And it's what happened to Brooke Clarke. Now, are you going to help me find the son of a bitch who did it, or are you going to stand there and tell me it's all in my head? Morgan stared at me, her mind a chaotic storm of conflicting emotions. She was a woman of science, of logic, of evidence, but I had just given her a piece of evidence that defied all rational explanation. She was at a crossroads, and the path she chose would determine the fate of us all. She took a deep breath, her gaze hardening with a newfound resolve. "All right," she said, her voice clipped and decisive. "You win. Let's go hunting for a ghost." We moved our base of operations to my office. The precinct was too public, too full of the psychic static of 100 other lives, too many places for the memory eater to hide. My office was a fortress, cluttered and chaotic, but it was my fortress. The walls were lined with shelves overflowing with books on metaphysics, occultism, and parapsychology. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, stale coffee, and the faint, lingering trace of countless other people's memories. Morgan looked around, her expression a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "This is your office." "It's a work in progress," I said, clearing a stack of unpaid invoices off a rickety chair. Jordan was already there, leaning against the filing cabinet, his arms crossed over his chest. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He was a fixer, a man who operated in the gray areas between the real world and the spirit realm, a world I had tried so hard to leave behind. "Maddie," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You've been busy." "Jordan," I said, nodding in greeting. "This is Detective Inspector Natalie Morgan. This is Jordan. He's an information broker." Morgan's gaze swept over him, her police instincts kicking in. "Information on what exactly?" "Things that don't show up in a police database," Jordan said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Like our friend, the memory eater." "And what have you found?" I asked, my heart pounding with anticipation. "Not much," he said, his smile fading, "which is a lot in itself. These things are like black holes in the information stream. They don't just erase their victims, they erase any record of their existence. It's like they never were. So we're looking for a needle in a haystack, except the needle doesn't exist," Morgan said, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Something like that," Jordan conceded. "But I did find one thing. A name. A rumor. Something that keeps popping up in the darkest corners of the net." He paused, letting the tension build. "The name is Brandon." The name hung in the air, a cold, heavy weight. Brandon. It was a name that resonated with a chilling familiarity. A name I'd heard before, in a life I'd tried to forget. "I know that name," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Jordan's gaze sharpened. "From where?" "From before," I said, my mind racing, fragments of memories surfacing like flotsam in a storm. "From my old life, when I was still with the agency. The agency. A shadowy government organization that had recruited me as a teenager, honing my psychic abilities into a weapon. They had been my family, my home, my prison. I had left them years ago, faking my own death and disappearing into the underworld of private investigation, trying to outrun a past that was always one step behind me. Brandon was one of their experiments," I continued, my voice tight with emotion. "A psychic prodigy, like me. But he was different. He was broken. He couldn't just view memories. He could absorb them. He could become the person whose memories he took." I could feel the room's temperature drop. Morgan's skepticism had been replaced by a dawning horror. Jordan's expression was grim. "He was the agency's ultimate weapon," I said, my mind a whirlwind of fragmented memories. "A perfect infiltrator, a master of disguise, but he was also their greatest failure. He lost himself in the memories, unable to distinguish between his own identity and the ones he stole. He became a monster." "So they shut him down?" Morgan asked, her voice barely a whisper. "They tried," I said. "But he was too powerful. He escaped, and he's been hiding in the shadows ever since, feeding on the memories of the living, growing stronger, more complete with every soul he consumes." I looked at Jordan, my mind a whirlwind of implications. The agency knew. They knew he was out there, and they didn't tell me. Of course they didn't, Jordan said, his voice flat. You were a loose end, Maddie, a potential threat. They weren't going to hand you the keys to the kingdom just because you asked nicely. The betrayal was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The agency, the people I had once trusted with my life, had left me to face a monster of their own making. A monster they had created and then set loose upon the world. But why Brooke? Morgan asked, her mind struggling to process the new information. Why her? She was a beacon, I said, my gaze distant. A source of strong, pure emotions, love, fear, desperation. She was a feast for a creature like Brandon. He didn't just want to erase her. He wanted to be her, to experience her life, her love, her fear. He wanted to consume her whole. The thought was so monstrous, so utterly depraved, it was almost impossible to comprehend. But it was the only thing that made sense. The erasure of her records, the meticulousness of the murder, the lingering sense of obsession. It was all part of a twisted, cosmic act of consumption. So how do we stop him? Morgan asked, her voice a grim determination. I looked at Jordan, then at Morgan, the weight of my past settling heavily on my shoulders. We don't, I said, my voice low and steady. I do. This was my fight. My monster. My past come back to haunt me. I couldn't ask Morgan to risk her life, her career, for a world she didn't understand. And I couldn't ask Jordan to get involved in something this dangerous. He had helped enough. The hell you will, Morgan said, her tone leaving no room for argument. You brought me into this, Madison. I'm seeing it through. Jordan nodded in agreement. She's right, Maddie. You can't do this alone. I looked at them, my heart aching with a mixture of gratitude and fear. I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies. I had friends. But that also meant I had something to lose. All right, I said, my decision made. But we do this my way. We need to draw him out. And how do we do that? Morgan asked. We give him what he wants, I said. A plan forming in my mind. A memory. A powerful one. A lore. I walked over to my desk and opened a small wooden box. Inside was a single, tarnished silver locket. It was identical to the one Brooke had owned, a twin, a memory of a life I had tried to forget. What is that? Jordan asked, his eyes narrowed. It's my mother's, I said, my voice soft. The last thing she ever gave me. It holds a memory of the day she died. The memory was a painful one, a jagged shard of glass in my mind. The screech of tires, the smell of gasoline, the blinding flash of headlights. But it was also a powerful one, a wellspring of grief and love that had shaped me into the person I was today. It was the perfect bait. Brandon will be drawn to it, I said, my gaze meeting theirs. He won't be able to resist. And then what? Morgan asked, her hand resting on the butt of her gun. And then we end this, I said, my voice hardening with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. Once and for all, the lure was set. I left the locket on my desk, its surface polished to a high sheen, its psychic energy a beacon in the darkness. Morgan and Jordan were hidden in the shadows, their weapons drawn, their minds focused. I was sitting in my chair, my back to the door, my eyes closed, my mind a fortress, waiting. The wait was an eternity. The air grew thick with a predatory silence. A sense of being watched that was so intense it felt like a physical pressure. I could feel him, a dark, hungry presence circling the edges of my mind, probing my defenses, testing my resolve. Then, a shift in the air. A cold spot in the center of the room. A flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. I opened my eyes. He was standing in front of my desk, a tall, gaunt figure with pale, almost translucent skin and eyes that were bottomless pits of hunger. He was both handsome and horrifying, a chimera of stolen identities, a collage of 100 different lives all crammed into one fragile frame. He reached for the locket, his fingers long and spindly, his movements unnaturally fluid. As his skin made contact with the metal, he flinched, a gasp of pleasure escaping his lips. He wasn't just a consumer of memories. He was an addict, and I had just offered him the purest heroin he'd ever tasted. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said, his voice a strange melodic chorus of a dozen different voices. "I've been looking for you, Madison. I've been waiting for you, Brandon," I said, my voice steady. He smiled, a slow, predatory curve of his lips. "Do you have any idea what you've given me? This memory? It's exquisite. A mother's love, a child's grief. It's a masterpiece." "It's a trap," I said, my hand tightening around the small silver pistol I had hidden under my desk. "A trap," he laughed, a sound that was like fingernails on a chalkboard. "You can't trap me, Madison. I am the trap. I am the void. I am the end." He raised the locket to his lips, his eyes closing in ecstasy. That was my cue. I fired. The bullet hit him square in the chest, a direct shot to the heart. He staggered back, a look of surprise on his face. But he didn't fall. He didn't bleed. He just stood there, a hole in his shirt, a look of amusement in his eyes. "You think you can hurt me with a toy?" he asked, a hint of anger in his chorus of voices. "I have died 1,000 times in 1,000 different bodies. I have felt the sting of a knife, the crushing weight of a car, the cold shock of a bullet. Your pain is my sustenance." I fired again and again, each shot a desperate act of defiance. He just stood there, a porcelain doll, a target that couldn't be broken. Then he was on me. He moved with an impossible speed, a blur of motion that was faster than the eye could follow. I felt a cold, clammy hand close around my throat, the same pressure Brooke had felt in her final moments. The world tilted, the air growing thin, the stars bursting behind my eyes. But I wasn't Brooke. I was stronger. I was a fortress, and I had a weapon he didn't expect. I reached out with my mind, not to attack, but to connect. I bypassed the surface of his consciousness, the stolen memories, the false identities, and plunged deep into the core of his being. And I found him. He wasn't a monster. He was a child, a lost, terrified child, huddled in a corner of his own mind, weeping for a mother he could barely remember. He was a psychic prodigy, a boy with a gift so powerful it had consumed him, a boy who had been used and abused and then discarded. I showed him my memory, the screech of tires, the smell of gasoline, the blinding flash of headlights. I showed him my grief, my loss, my pain, but I also showed him my love, my strength, my resilience. I showed him that even in the darkest of places, there is a light that cannot be extinguished. He recoiled, a scream of pure agony tearing from his lips. He let go of my throat, stumbling back, his hands clutching his head. "No!" he shrieked, his voices merging into one, a single desperate cry. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" I pressed my advantage, pouring all of my energy, all of my love, all of my pain into the connection. I was a forge, and he was the metal, and I was burning away all the impurities, all the stolen memories, all the false identities, leaving only the pure, terrified core of the boy he once was. He collapsed to the floor, his body twitching, his form flickering like a faulty hologram. The stolen memories were leaking out of him, a torrent of psychic energy that filled the room, 1,000 different lives playing out all at once. Morgan and Jordan rushed to my side, their weapons raised, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. "What did you do?" Jordan asked, his voice a hushed whisper. "I didn't kill him," I said, my own breathing ragged. "I set him free." The torrent of memories subsided, and Brandon was gone. In his place was a small, frail boy, no older than 10, with pale skin and wide, terrified eyes. He was naked, vulnerable, a ghost in the machine, a spirit without a body. Who are you?" he asked, his voice a small, timid whisper. I knelt down, my heart aching with a wave of pity. "My name is Madison," I said, my voice soft, "and you're safe now." He stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. Then he looked past me, a look of recognition dawning in his eyes. "Mommy?" he asked, his voice a hopeful, fragile whisper. I turned and saw her, a woman standing in the corner of the room, a faint, shimmering apparition. She had the same pale skin, the same wide, terrified eyes. She was Brandon's mother, the memory he had been searching for, the identity he had been trying to reclaim. She smiled, a sad, beautiful smile. "I'm here, my sweet boy," she said, her voice a gentle whisper. "I've always been here." She held out her hands and the boy ran to her, a look of pure joy on his face. As he reached her, they both began to fade, their forms dissolving into the air like mist in the morning sun. And then they were gone. I was left kneeling on the floor, my body trembling, my mind a chaotic storm of 1,000 different lives. Jordan helped me to my feet, his arm a steady, supportive presence around my shoulders. "You did it, Maddie," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You did it." Morgan was staring at the spot where they had vanished, her face a mask of disbelief. What just happened?" "A ghost story," I said, my voice a soft whisper. "With a happy ending." The aftermath was a strange, quiet interlude. The air in my office was still, the psychic silence a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the past few days. The locket was gone, consumed in the psychic firestorm, its sacrifice a necessary price for peace. Morgan was the first to break the silence. "I have to file a report," she said, her voice tight with the strain of trying to reconcile the impossible with the logical. "I don't know what I'm going to say." "Say it was a gas leak," Jordan suggested, a faint smile playing on his lips. "People will believe anything if you say it with enough authority." Morgan shot him a look, but there was a hint of a smile in her eyes. "I'll think of something," she said. "But you two, you need to be careful. The world isn't ready for this." "The world is never ready for anything," I said, my gaze distant. "It just deals with it." She nodded, a look of understanding passing between us. We had shared something, an experience that had transcended the boundaries of our respective worlds. "Take care of yourself, Madison," she said, her voice soft. "You too, Natalie," I replied, using her first name for the first time. She gave me a final, lingering look, then turned and walked out the door, leaving me and Jordan alone in the quiet sanctuary of my office. "So," Jordan said, breaking the silence, "what now?" I looked around my office at the cluttered shelves, the stacks of unpaid invoices, the water-stained ceiling. It was still a mess, still a fortress, but it felt different. It felt like home. "Now," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, "I think I'm going to make a pot of coffee." Jordan chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that was like a warm blanket in the cold silence. "It's about damn time." And as the scent of fresh coffee filled the room, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The monster was gone. The ghost was free. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was just Madison, a psychic private eye with a past, a present, and maybe, just maybe, a future. That was the monster within. Thank you so much for listening and spending this time here with me. If you enjoyed the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps more stories like this find the people who will connect with them. There's more coming. More strange cases. More haunted people. More stories about the things we carry and the things that carry us. So stay tuned, and until next time, thanks for being here.